Hello, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Okay. So that's my bio. Oil and gas is really where I have historically spent my time. A little bit of time in not-for-profit in the last couple of years, which actually has been the majority of our audiences up till now. So I'm going to have to pivot a little bit. But I'm also, as mentioned, the vice chair of the CPHR Alberta, as well as the director with the Safety Codes Council of Alberta. And I work with Little Warriors, which is a association with a ranch for sexually abused children. So definitely lots of stuff on the go. But what that allows me to do is spend lots of time in different organizations and see lots of different things. Some of the things that I see are pretty consistent, however. We talk about strategic workforce management. What we often see, that's an area where we see a lot of issues. So by show of hands in the room, how many people here would say that they're overworked? It's all not the locals who are all like, yep, me. Okay, so you guys are definitely a very different group than what we're used to, so this is going to be interesting. So if you've got questions along the way, don't hesitate to ask. So what I'm talking today really is about aligning people in business. Again, trying to put a lens on it where people don't necessarily feel as though they are overworked or their roles are scattered. So we've already been through this because we shifted, so thank you for allowing us to do that. So for you guys in the room, when you hear organizational structure or alignment, what do you think of? Just throw it out. What do you think about? Governance? Absolutely, yeah. Change? Yeah. What else? Efficiency. Absolutely. What else? Culture? So those things, absolutely. And what we often see as HR consultants and professionals is that efficiencies are an area where there is a real problem. Would you guys agree that not necessarily as efficient as you could be during the day? I want to work where you guys work. It's great. So really at its most basic level, when we look at organizational structure, it's really about sequential tasks, right? And so caveman is the example I use, though I realize there's lots of debate as to whether or not caveman actually existed. That's not the debate we're having today. But in that time, in that period, tasks were really sequential and were very clearly defined, right? And so you had to gather in order to preserve and all those sorts of things. And so tasks were very, very sequential. But we actually don't see that anymore. And no longer are tasks as clearly defined as they once were for people, which does create a lot of role confusion for people and a lot of cross-training. And so the current structure, in the words that we most often see now, and from an HR perspective, my HR friends in the room will know this. We hear a lot about job descriptions, concurrent priorities, and we hear a lot about competency development profiles and succession planning and performance reviews and with a 1-minute manager and all these sorts of things, right? Which is very different. It does not necessarily allow us to have this sort of sequential task analysis. And so, or we see lots of businesses that actually have no structure at all. Does anybody here work inside an organization that has very little structure? No? Lots of organizations are starting to have very little structure, and they have it on purpose. And the reason they don't have all the structure is so that they feel as though then they have flexibility to be able to make changes and autonomy and all those sorts of things and aren't bound by practices. And it doesn't always work, but sometimes it does. But it doesn't always work because what it does is it leads to a lack of expectations. Sometimes organizations, when it comes to structure, just don't know what they need. So I once worked for an organization that I won't name, but we had a leader who would read part of a book and then implement, but not get to the end, right? I'm not sure have any of you ever read the Patrick Lencioni books? Yeah, they're wonderful, and if you haven't, you should. Anybody who manages people should read The Ideal Team Player. Like, go buy it today. And it will take you a few hours to read, and it will change the way that you manage people. It is very simple. But and the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. But regardless, he would start to read books on some of those books, and they're fables. And so you get through part of the story, and then implement change, but not actually finish it, right? Which is how that particular organization ended up with the Matrix organization without realizing the potential impact, right? Which is a bit of a problem. So it absolutely happens. So just really quick in your groups, I just want you, we're actually gonna do this a little bit differently because we've got a bit of a different team here. So in about 10 minutes, I just want you to take a minute and write down in order of events, the tasks that you go through in a day. So we're not looking at strategy today. Right now, we're going to look at tasks. So just the tasks that you go through in a day. You get in the office, what do? You know, check email, visit your staff, like those sorts of things. Just real quick, in order of importance, or just in order of your day, write that down. Okay, so just at your tables, just like it says here, just pick 3 or 2 or 3 of those tasks that you wrote down and think about which ones do not add value to your role and take up a regular, a fairly significant amount of time. And at your table, I just want you to very quickly discuss how these things became your responsibility. So for example, was it because somebody left and the role wasn't replaced? Is it because you're good at it? Is there a theme to the task? So for example, are they all administrative? And are they all necessary tasks? So just at your table, pick out 2 and have a quick chat. There's method to my madness, I promise. Okay, let's bring it back up here. So how many of you were able to come up with tasks that are non-value add? Or things that don't necessarily add to your day or add to your role? Hands up, how many of you were able to do that? Non-value add tasks? Okay, awesome. And so was there any theme to what those tasks were at your tables? Did you come up with any themes of what they might be? Yeah? At our table, we discussed most of what we do is administrative. Oh, hang on, we need to get the mic to you. Sorry, Chris. I know you've got something from Hannah as well.
Okay. From our table, we discussed that mostly everything we do is administrative in its orientation.
Right. Okay. Chris, you've got something from Hannah?
Yes, from the team in Hannah, they're mentioning the waste of time of having to leave your city or your point of where your office is and go to other places for professional development, networking, things like that. So that can cause a bit of a problem here. And as Scott, our technician, mentioned, he said that's the whole point of live streaming, right? To be able to do these types of things and be able to get these sort of items outside of your area. So that's always good.
Sure. Over here.
We had administrative as well, but I think another one we identified at our table was chasing information. So there's things happening and you think you're in alignment and either someone didn't communicate with you. Well, that's generally it. Someone didn't communicate, so you're chasing that information to try and manage the situation either in your department or change plans from an HR perspective for the organization.
Yep. That's a real issue in HR. And we've only got some HR people in the room, but chasing information or getting the right information is a huge issue in HR. And one of the things I 15 years had to consistently say, just tell me everything and I'll sort out what I need. But don't try to filter it for me because that's a real issue around HR. So for our non-HR friends, it's a real problem for HRs when they get limited information. So I can absolutely, you bet. This table here, anything to share? You don't have to if you don't want to, just wave them off. Okay, you guys, anything to share?
Yeah, one of the routine things, it's along the chasing the information, is the additional meetings to capture that information just to get them in a point in time so you can, instead of being provided with a summary sheet or an email summarizing things, you're collecting people and wasting valuable time to meet.
You bet, yeah. Yeah, we could do a whole 90 minutes on meetings for sure. Anything here?
Mine's on relationship building.
Okay.
I do a lot of liaison between departments, so a lot of it's debriefing from the day before and then in future and etc. So it's a lot of time, not time wasting conversations, but you sometimes wish you could just point form what you need to say so I can get going.
Okay, good. Okay. So what we normally find when we ask that question is there's 2 themes that we see is A, they're largely administrative, the tasks, and B, the person who's doing them is not the best person to do them because they're not very good at it. And so as an example, when I do public speaking, I often hire somebody to build my presentations for me because I am not skilled at building PowerPoints. It's awful. Like it's awful. I can't, I have no defense. It's awful. And so I actually pay somebody else to do it because then it's done effectively. It's not, it's not taking up much more of my time to do this and Google Pictures. So I often do that. But that's often what we see is that's the theme. So hang on to that list because we're going to use it again. So how many of you ever heard or it's been said to you, you just need to get the right people on the bus, right? Yeah. Yeah. And how many of you get a little ragey when you hear it? Yeah, because it's not that simple. And I'm happy to hear that you're insulated here in Lethbridge in terms of what your economy looks like. I'm really happy to hear that. Most of the province isn't. And so we continue to say these things like we just need to get the right person on the bus, right? But that doesn't always work, especially when it comes to budgets, when it comes to restrictions, when it comes to all sorts of things. Because often the person who is driving the bus is also maintaining the bus. putting gas in the bus. And lots of times, if you own your own business or you're working for a small business, you're trying to find alternative sources of income to be able to put that gas in the bus. Because it's just not that simple that you just have it, right? Lots of times the person's driving the bus and then filling all of these seats. And so when it comes to organizational structure, where we find our employees get so frustrated is when we say things like this, but give them very few resources to sort it out. So that's what we're going to do for the rest of my time, is to sort of go through how we can help employees, both ourselves and how we can help employees to go through some of this. Because oftentimes what our employees actually feel like and what we feel like is this. Does that resonate with anybody? Has anybody felt like that recently? I am moving to Lethbridge immediately. Because the reality is that small businesses, and not even all small businesses, but lots of large businesses, I know that businesses like Flint, or I guess AECOM now, but a lot of the larger businesses are going through the same things. When I was working for Magnum, we saw lots of our clients, the Enbridges of the world and the Syncrude and the Suncor, going through the same thing, where there was, the person that you talked to was then no longer there, which might be something that might resonate more with you guys, is that you could be dealing with your clients and all of a sudden your client is missing. Not missing, but the person that you were dealing with is no longer there because they're part of a larger organization that has gone through some downsizing, and it really does happen. So organizations we're finding now during the recession, though ATB did say that we are out of the recession, we're not necessarily feeling it everywhere, but ATB did announce in August that the recession is officially over. But lots of them have limited information or limited funds, and so they're consistently not able to refill some of the roles and consistently not able to establish some of the programs that they previously had in place. And so what we see, and again, glad to hear it's not necessarily resonating here, but it likely will for your clients, is that we are not backfilling roles in lots of cases. And so when somebody leaves, instead of backfilling them, their roles are then just becoming, their responsibilities are becoming redistributed to somebody else. And somebody's just picking them up, right? And so then we end up in a position where you've got people who are so incredibly burnt out because they've got all of these things to pick up, or things are getting dropped and they're dropping things that were previously not part of their role. So then that feels awful, and it feels as though they're not actually performing very well. But the case is actually that we just don't have necessarily the right people, or the right tasks assigned to the right people. Is there any questions about that, or anybody have any situations they want to, or feedback? Is this happening? Anybody's? Yes. Hang on. I'm to be very honest with you, I'm fascinated by Lethbridge. Like I think this is such an interesting, like the fact that it's so insulated is interesting. So I'd love to hear your stories.
I think it's a situation where it's not necessarily.
It's hard to hear yourself in this room because it's so big. So you can't necessarily tell that you're mic'd. Go ahead, I'll repeat.
Anyway, it's not always a situation of having the right people in the role. I know with our environment, it is, we've grown really quickly.
Yeah.
And with that, our processes haven't, and technology have not kept up
with our speed of growth, because it was a fairly organic growth. So in terms of what we're missing, you could keep adding resources, but you're never going to get more efficient. So it is a matter of looking what tasks are important, what don't we need to do. Is there a process that we can use to streamline or make ourselves more efficient? And once you kind of have more consistency between the process or in your processes, it's what technology can help us. So it's a lot more for us than just having the right people in the role. There's a whole counter side to that, just with our experience and how we've grown over the last few years.
Yep, and there are some fairly simple exercises we can go through to help find that, but it takes a remarkable amount of self-discipline to go through those exercises. And I'll talk about it in a minute, but one of the reasons people don't do it is because people often don't want to talk about all of the things that they're doing for a number of different reasons. In some cases, they're protecting other people they work for, so they don't necessarily want to talk about all of the things they've picked up, because then it looks like somebody else has dropped those things, right? And we don't always want to do that, because we like to do the nice thing, because we know that that person's husband lost their job, having trouble with their kids, like all these sorts of, so that happens all the time, right, where we see that happen. And sometimes people, I talked about this in, we did Edmonton, and did a task analysis with a group, and I found out a whole bunch of things. But what I largely found out was that they didn't want to talk about the things they were doing because they were embarrassed about some of the things they were doing, including picking up dry cleaning. which is, do you know what I mean? And so, but if that takes up part of your day, then that's not a non-value add task. And that is something that I have not seen since, I'm sure, the 80s was a thing. I don't know, but yes.
I was just going to say, we do
Mike, this-
we do exercises with our work groups doing flow chains. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So what we do is we take sticky notes on the wall and we map out what the process is that we do in our organization. Maybe it's task A. First off, we decide, is that a value-added task on our patient's behalf? Because I think we get caught up so many times doing things that we think are so important that need to be done to get a job done, but really when you look at it through the eyes of the patient, they don't really see the benefit of it.
Yep.
And so as long as it's not really impacting safety, of course, we strip down those tasks and we do the sticky note thing. We write, okay, how the task is done, put all the sticky notes across the walls. First we do this, then we do this, then we do this and this. And then we have the team members kind of problem solve it themselves. And then they can see that task, well, maybe we can eliminate that step, and they pull off all the little sticky notes in the chain. And it really helps them. So it's not necessarily us being the bad guys, telling somebody they're doing something wrong. They can see the inefficiency themselves, and then they can see a solution themselves.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and that is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. That's almost exactly the exercise that we go through. I think it's phenomenal that you're doing it because lots of organizations aren't doing task analysis that way. And you can use that same structure for all kinds of things. If you can use it for focus groups in the event that you're doing, if anybody's still actually doing engagement surveys, you can do the same thing with for focus groups. You can do the sticky note method is one I live by because it allows people the opportunity to provide feedback on just on situations, on processes. Sometimes it works, and this is a dangerous thing for me to say, but sometimes it works when there are internal issues inside departments. It helps you get to the root when you can't get there, though it must be done by a very qualified HR person. Do not suggest you try to do that on your own, because that can go sideways really fast. But for lots of other situations, doing a task analysis, exactly as you said, is exactly what I would recommend people do. Exactly. Is anybody else doing task analysis that way, or any sort of problem or issue processing that way? The other thing that's nice about it, and again, another thing that's really nice about it is it doesn't feel like an HR process. And lots of businesses do not want we need to make sure that our HR staff is working very cohesively with our operations staff, and that's a really nice way to do it because it does not feel like there is any sort of feeling attached to it. It is very fact-based. So it's a really good one to go to do. So what we often see in a lot of cases when it comes to task analysis is that resources aren't added to businesses until the person who's doing or is there is completely full, like burnt out full. And so then we start to add people in, but instead of taking the time to do task analysis at that time, what often happens is you add another person and they pick up all the things that are getting dropped, right? Rather than actually, even though there might be a job description, they are likely picking up things that are being dropped. And so there are, in many cases, is not that time to go through and say, okay, so where are your strengths? And that sort of thing, especially in small business, it's really important to do that. And adding resources can very frequently solve a short-term problem because the pressure comes off people, but then you end up with an entirely different situation where your processes have become completely inefficient because, again, it's not the right person doing them. And there's lots of constraints to making these fixes. Sorry, I'll get out late. Lots of constraints to making these fixes. Time and money is a huge constraint for lots of organizations. You know, the time to hire somebody, the time to train somebody, those things are expensive. And I understand and appreciate that there is, there's a positive at the end of it, that you've then got a new shiny employee. Lots of times people don't want to remove somebody because they don't want to have to deal with the process of having to hire and retrain somebody. And so that becomes a bit dicey. Attrition is a problem, and so if you have people working for you who are already a little bit burned out, you may lose people in the process even when you're trying to add new people. And so highly frustrating when you are already short-staffed or might not have the right people and you lose one of the right people along the way because people do get burnt out. Burnout is an absolute real thing that we don't talk about enough. Has anybody ever heard any HR or anybody talk about adrenal fatigue? We need to be talking more about adrenal fatigue in terms of our employees. So if you have employees, take a second and research adrenal fatigue and watch the signs of your employees. And control, especially small businesses, giving up the control of what some of those people do in those positions is challenging, especially if you've always done it. And time to trust people, it is not that easy to trust people when you bring them into your organization. It takes time to trust people. It really does. And so some things to consider when you're doing task analysis is what resources do you actually have inside your organization, and really think about what the skills are. Skills matrices are really, really important. Do any of you have that inside your business right now? Do you do a skill matrix? No? Super easy to do. You can easily do it in Excel. So you just really, what you need to do is you need to figure out what the key skills are of running your organization, right? Or even your department. And then you put those skills, and then you put your people on the left-hand side, and you really just line it up. And so does this person, does Marcy able to do these things? What is her skill level with recruitment? What is her skill level with compensation? And you can do that with any of your roles, and that will really allow you to be able to figure out where your gaps are. Also works really well with training. If you've got training, if you're an organization that requires people to have tickets, works the same way. And do you know what your resources are capable of? So I, for a year, took a break from HR, and I was running one of our facilities in Nisku. And I ran it for a year, but I ran it for about 3 months before I realized that one of our laborers on the floor had an MBA. Had no idea. English wasn't his first language. We just never had the conversation. But he had an MBA from Mexico, and he was an absolute genius when it came to mapping out processes. And here I was 3 months into a business that had no SOPs, had no standard operating procedures. And I just never asked the question, right? So really important that you have those conversations with your people so you know what the people you have inside your organization are capable of, and are they committed, right? And so I heard lots when we first started today about issues finding the right people, or roles that might be difficult to fill, right? So are the people that you have in the roles today committed? Because that could be affecting your ability to add other people to your organization. And Lana's talked a little bit about this, and I'm really happy about that. And so do you, as an organization, know who your internal and your external customers are? It's really important that your organization, the people inside your organization, especially your client-facing people, know who your internal and external customers are, and who their internal and external customers are. So again, a really good area, I suggest that you have a conversation with your employees and ask them, do you know who they are? Some, dealerships, things like that, you know who your external customer is a lot of the time, but who's your internal customer, right? Really important to have that conversation. And does everybody agree on who they are, right? I mean, they're going to be different for some people, but largely does everybody agree? Because organizational structure needs to align with not only the business that you're in, but those that you're aiming to serve. And that is something that we really need to think about as organizations. Are you aligning with the businesses that you're trying to serve? And then do your employees know what the expectations are? One of the biggest challenges around HR is expectations, right? And so that's why position descriptions exist. That's why all sorts of programs exist, because employees need to know what's expected of them. And when some of the organizations that don't run with a lot of structure, one of the challenges is that people then do not know what's expected of them. And people largely do not perform well when they do not know what is expected of them, right? Really important that you hear that. People need to know what is expected of them. And so, before we do that, okay, so before we do that, I'll get everybody to go back to your list. Is there any questions before I go on? Anything at all? Feedback? Nothing? Okay. All right, so go back to your list. Sorry guys, I'm on the wrong page here. Okay, so I want you to cross out anything on your list that is not strategic. Okay. I want you to cross out anything on your list that is purely administrative and you are not an administrative professional. Okay. Cross out any task that is not value add to the organization. And then cross out any task that you can't figure out why it's your job. Okay. And when I talk about not value added, just to give you an example, and we heard this one of the previous sessions, is that we had one group where everybody in the group was getting the mail every day. Every single person was getting the mail every day. And it wasn't until somebody came back and said, oh, I went to get the mail, and there was no mail, that they realized that every single person was going to get the mail. So I talk about not value add, that would be an area where consider. Okay, so of what's left of your list, how many of you still have half of your tasks uncrossed out? At least half. How many still have at least, you look ashamed. Doing my job right. How many of you still have at least 3/4? Okay. So most often what we see is not quite the same representation. What we often see is, again, a lot of people with a whole variety of things that they don't necessarily know how they landed on their plates, right? Which can be a real challenge. So how do we solve it? Task analysis is really the first step to solving it. Oh, go ahead. You have a question? Oh. Oh, yeah. Yes. It really is, right? So the best way to solve it is through task analysis. It's through the sticky note method. And so really, really happy to see that you guys do that. It's a bit different. It's not quite as much the swim lanes, but rather what you need to do is admit that you have a problem, because lots of organizations don't admit they have a problem at all, right? And so, and again, to go back to the overtime, lots and lots of people are working tons and tons of overtime that they are never tracking for all kinds of reasons, right? They're, it's a small business and they don't, they support the business. The business has been good to them, so they're looking to be good to the business back. They're covering for somebody else who's going through a hardship at that particular time, and they don't want to bring any extra attention to it. They potentially don't feel as though they're as efficient or as effective in their own role as they could be, and so that's why they're working over and not telling anybody, right? Can anybody tell me what happens when we don't track overtime? What is the negative impact of not tracking overtime, other than burnout? Yeah. That's exactly it. The answer was you don't know if there's another person that's required for the job. You do not know if you were under-resourced, if your staff is overworked, if you aren't tracking it. If you aren't at least tracking it, right? And this one, understanding there's some changes coming with Bill 17 in terms of how overtime is tracked going forward, which is creating lots and lots of concern for employers. So, maybe a particularly important time to be talking about overtime. And so again, acknowledge that your staff is a problem. And so task analysis is the next step. And so what I suggest you do is you pick a period of time. And you can be a day. I would not have it ever be less than a full day. 3 days is really what I would suggest. And you write down every task that you do. Every single task. It doesn't matter how menial you think it is. If you're stopping to check email, write it down, right? And and there's no surprise here. What we're trying to see is, are you checking email 76 times a day, right? Are you doing something that somebody else inside your organization is already doing? Are you doing something somebody else inside your organization is better suited to do than you? Or are you bogged down by administrative tasks, right? So it can be done individually. I suggest you do it as a team. So you have your team do it, and then you transfer it to sticky notes. And that gives you then the ability to be able to really look at all the tasks that your team is doing. And then do the task review, so then you can theme it out, right? And so what's administrative, what is strategic, what is recruitment, what is compensation? And then you can really theme out all the tasks that are happening. And then provided your staff and your teams are willing to look at that, then you can actually really look at the duplication of efforts and really talk about what's value add and what's value add to the organization. And then plan for change management. And change management is a really tough thing, is a really, really tough thing. The model I like to use is called ADKAR, A-D-K-A-R, and what it allows you to do is to take any sort of significant change and run it through a model to figure out how to best manage it. Is that one that you use as well? Yeah. Yeah, it's my favorite. Because what it does is it reminds people that you need to bring awareness to change. Has anybody here ever done DISC or Myers-Briggs or any of those? Yeah. Is it DISC or Myers-Briggs? Myers-Briggs? Yeah. I can't translate that one as well. But DISC, there is certainly a personality style that is around steadiness. And so those people are often misunderstood as being resistant to change, just need to understand change, right? So when it comes to change, I highly recommend that you use a model and work through how that change will be perceived for people and how it will feel to people. Because for some people, it will feel as though something is being taken away, which is something that you really never want to do. And then normalize, and so give things time to settle with really open communication, but give things time to settle, which is something we don't always do. We don't always give things enough time to settle in and see how they work. And organizational structure can very easily become disjointed, and it's tough, to fix once it becomes disjointed, right? I often equate it to the 5 pounds, right? It's really easy to gain 5 pounds, but really tough to take them off. It's not dissimilar. So I'm not going to do a case study because we went through the exercise, but we still have about 20 minutes if there are any questions at all that either Landis or I can answer. Is there anything from Hannah? No? What questions can we answer for you? Yes.
How can you incorporate more strategic? Oh, sorry. Thank you. How do you suggest incorporating more strategic planning into your day? Like, I just finished reading for the first time Stephen Covey's Habits of Highly Effective People, and I really want to live in quadrant 2. Like, I see the value in the book, and yeah, so that's what I'm thinking. That's really important. And so in doing your task list, then how can you, so you make up a plan, you set your priorities, and then in quadrant 1, like everyone else is determining your agenda. But if you're genuinely living in quadrant 2 and you're looking at long-term benefits and creating goals, I'm just wondering, what would that look like from your perspective?
I'll answer, then I'll give Landis a chance.
Okay.
So the true answer to that question is that starts long before the day starts. It starts in strategic planning. And then so your organization needs to be doing proper strategic planning on a regular basis. Annually doesn't cut it anymore. Like, you will be doing quarterly, if not monthly, strategic planning because everything is changing so quickly. And then it is a matter of tracking to those goals. And when you go off goal for any reason, then your organization needs to have the awareness to say, okay, we've gone off goal. Did we do this on purpose because we needed to, or have we just gone off goal, right? So it starts long before the day and the tasks that happen in a day. It really starts before that. I know that's not a simple answer at all, but strategic planning is really, really important. And it used to be these very long, I don't know if anybody's ever read the Rockefeller Principles. It's this big, huge tool. They talk about rocks and the BHAG and the big, hairy, audacious goal and all those sorts of things we used to talk about and still do sometimes. But those strategic plans are big animals. Like, those are beasts. And by the time you're done, or I'm done facilitating one, I've forgotten what's on it. So my recommendation is to make smaller chunks and things that are really meaningful to the organization. Landis?
I know that you're starting your own business. And so you might want to think about, when is the best time for you to do good quality thinking? So if your best time is from 9 until 10 in the morning, or 9 to 11, is to block off that time as if it's an appointment. And I find, if you sometimes it's just taking a breath to think what really is important here, and not to get so busy doing. I don't know if the rest of you are there, but sometimes if I'm getting stressed or whatever, I get on the path, or I get on the treadmill and I just keep running and I don't ever think about it. Don't do strategic planning when you're exhausted, when you're stressed.
It's like grocery shopping hungry.
Or if you're hungry, it's not going to work. Yeah. And have fun with it. Strategy is not always a drag. Think about and bring the little pieces of creativity. Find your spot wherever it is in your house, because you're working from home, that brings that out in you. And I would suggest starting there. And another thing that I like to encourage people to think about is, stop doing work that you hate. I don't think we should waste our time. Life is too short and too precious. So if you don't want to do this, don't do it. Let it go. Give it to another consultant, and spend time on something that you like to do and that you bring value to. Yeah.
The other point I would bring up is so we talk a lot about working in and on the business, and so which are two different things, right? And so you're either working in your business or on your business, depending on the tasks that you're doing and how they strategically align. But I hear about that nowhere more than in small professional groups. And so networking is tough. I'm awful at it, but I do have a small group of like-minded professionals where I'm able to bounce some of those things off of in terms of how strategic I'm being in terms of my own business and the businesses I work in. I was in a part of a tech group for a long time. Really important that you have a network of people who are going to be really, really honest with you about some of that sort of stuff. Yes.
Thank you. I was wondering if you could speak to productivity tools. I've been in a few organizations where we've rolled out organizational-wide productivity tools, and I've seen it work really, really well, and I've seen it fall flat just because it wasn't rolled out right and there was no take-up.
Yep.
Have you seen situations in which it has worked really well, software implementations, things like that, and what seem to be the key ingredients to a successful rollout and adoption?
Yeah, I tend to get involved when they're already broken. So I tend to get involved at the place where an organization has tried to roll something out and not done it well, and then there's a cultural shift in the organization, because what happens is with lots of these, they are often misperceived, and so perceived potentially as big brother, right, or tracking time. And so before that, I think it's important to understand the culture of your business and know why you're doing it, and then go back to change management implementation and really think through why you're doing it and what you're hoping to get from it, and heavily, heavily communicate that. Because like I said, it is when that is done poorly and there's an engagement issue because employees now feel as though they're being watched, that becomes a problem. Landis, what experience do you have with productivity tools?
I can't right now come up with any tools that I've found that fit every culture. It really depends on your organization. But as Marcy said, I think what's critical is communication and talking to people about their feelings when you're driving change. Make sure you talk to them about why the change is needed, not just change happens every day. Talk to them about how it's going to affect their role as well. There's different changes in an organization. Sometimes it's just an efficiency. Other times we're phasing out the receptionists in this company. We're going to just have people call into a phone line. So identify what type of change it is, and then communicate that with the organization. And acknowledge when people are frustrated. Yeah. Let them have their time to, we used to call it a 1 minute mad. So we'd come in the room and the frustration would get out, and then it would be, okay, now what are we going to do to fix this? If you don't let that frustration come out, it will fester. And then you'll get the little chats by the water cooler. And that doesn't help when you're trying to make those big changes.
I'd also very highly recommend, if you're going to implement something like that, and again, focus purely on the implementation, is figure out who your change agents are inside your organization and who your resistors are, and try to hit them early. And so your change agents, your stakeholders, need to be the ones who are, when they're hearing it, or either correcting things that are confused or not being conveyed properly, or also coming back to you and say, hey, this is what I'm hearing, so potentially we're not communicating that properly, and also getting to your resistors early, because they can create a fairly significant problem for you.
I just have one other thought, and make sure you have one senior leadership member
Yes.
who supports the change and can speak to it.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Can I actually add something that, and correct me if you think otherwise, but it's also important to understand who you're working with and what your peers and people that work for you need in order to be productive. So that might be the physical environment, it might be the tools, it might be additional coaching or training on, even if it's Outlook productivity. There's a lot of things out there that they might be able to benefit from, and by understanding who you're working with, that might be helpful as well.
Yeah. It doesn't always go well. In two of the organizations that I worked with, we put GPS in vehicles. And you can only imagine how that went. And one of them, the tablets ended up underneath the wheels in vehicles. And so if you're not properly communicating, which really happens, right? If you're not properly communicating why you're doing it, it feels like as though something is being taken away. And sometimes it's just a little slice of freedom, and that can really challenge people.
Something that we did in our organization, and it's an example of just because there's a system out there to do it is not necessarily the reason that you should just jump on and adopt a new system without clearly identifying if that system is going to fit in your culture. So this little example was we brought in under advisement, a timekeeping system. And this thing had all the bells and whistles. It could track everything. And previously we were using a manual timesheets. And I'm going to tell you, it had its own IT challenges to start with, but also, so that didn't help the change. And the whole idea of this, it came down from our finance department that we need to have this system. We need to save money. There's money left on the table from, staff not punching in at the right times or whatever. And I'll tell you what, that really created a culture resistance because it made people feel like they weren't being trusted, and that's exactly not what we wanted. And then the system was not a perfect system, so we didn't really have good support from our managers that the actual tool itself was effective. And in the end, the system actually cost us more with the increments. Without going in the explanation of it, it wouldn't calculate properly. It was actually costing us more money. Our own employees' honesty of just putting 8 to 4 as opposed to 4 minutes before 8 and 1 minute after. Like, it ended up paying overtime on it. And if we would have just really looked at, is this something that our culture even needs? We probably shouldn't have even wasted our money on it. So really evaluating if all those tools that are out there really are necessary in your culture, because it can really create a lot of problems.
You're absolutely right.
So there's that. The other point I wanted to mention is we do a tool called Kolbe measurement. If anybody's familiar with that? So Kathy Kolbe is this person who's created this test, and we give it to our employees when we hire them, and it really helps us. It breaks it down how their brain decodes solving problems. I guess probably the best way. So how a employee is going to analyze a problem and how they would solve the problem. And some people are quick starts and they come out of the gate with an answer. And some people are very methodical or very strategic. And what this whole assessment does is it really helps us match people to other employees and match them to tasks and jobs that their brain is really going to be stimulated and fulfilled by doing. So it's just kind of a cool measurement system that we do to just put people in a fulfilling position. So when you talk about, sorry,
can you spell it? Because people were writing it down.
It's Kolbe, Kolbe. But it just really helps people, and it helps managers make sure that you're constantly stimulating your employees and putting them in tasks and roles that are going to keep their creative juices going all the time. I know there's a lot of tasks that I really don't like in a day, and I probably list them all here and cross them all off and pass them off to somebody else. So you're going to want to put me in roles that maybe those tasks aren't, maybe the details or whatever. I flourish maybe in a different environment, still in the same office, but maybe in a different role, a different seat on the bus.
Yep. And there's lots of tools like that. And there's lots of, DISC has one, there's Quig, there's lots of them, but I think they're great to use them. I just think sometimes you just need to put a bit of a caveat on them. Sometimes people, when they do them at the wrong time. Why with DISC, we talk a lot about making sure you have your sort of do it at work. Like when you're not stressed out, don't do it at home. But yes, I think pre-employment tools are fantastic to at least give you a baseline. The other thing I was going to say, so most of my career has been around mergers and acquisitions, and I've done like 14 integrations. And in that time, the one single most important lesson I've learned is to only change what needs to be changed. And I get that sounds very simple, but it's not necessarily the case. Lots of times people want to change things for all kinds of reasons, for ego, for perceived culture reasons. So with anything, including implementing a new program, take the time to figure out why you're doing it and if that needed to change, because we do not always do that. Yep, that's awesome. Thank you so much for that. Anybody else?
While you were chatting, I was thinking of some examples that I've worked with companies about tools and changes that have not worked. And that is that you get approached by marketing folks every once in a while about how you should be changing your performance management system. And that it's a software package and you should use it. That is a great example of just pausing and thinking, do we need to change the system we have? And will this tool work for us? Because where my role has been is I've come in after they've spent all this money on a performance management tool. They've implemented into the culture, kind of, and then they find out it doesn't work. And then employees are frustrated, management's frustrated. And the next time you want to actually roll out a program that's needed, you're going to have a bit of a pushback from your folks. So my caution for you is think about whether we really do need to change the performance management system.
And for the love of God, if you aren't doing performance management now, don't implement a system. Like, do it inside your business first, and then figure out what system you need. But it's not going to solve your HR issues by not doing performance management and then all of a sudden implementing a system that you're not totally sure how to use. It happens.